it's a wild frontier, and nobody really knows how AI is going to impact the justice system or the legal system. Most of the, I think, uh, most of the concerns have been, how's that going to impact people's jobs? Is that going to
Mm,
make certain jobs obsolete so that people will then be unemployed or they'll have to find whole new careers? And there's some of that in the law because there are,
mm,
there are all kinds of lawyers or solicitors in the UK who
mm,
do all kinds of law, from corporate law to contracts to family law,
mm,
criminal criminal law, and most in America, most lawyers never actually go to court or never in the courtroom. They're doing stuff
mm,
outside of the courtroom, which is um, what solicitors generally do in the UK, although they're present in court when the barrister is later hired and handles the case in court. But particularly in areas of the law like contract, where it used to be that very skilled, experienced lawyers would draft contracts and make sure that this phrase was in,
mm,
something else was not, that it's very clear what the intent of the parties were in reaching the contractual agreement. Now AI is taking over some of that. So some of their
mm,
jobs may become obsolete. Now, whether that will, it's hard for me to imagine how that will impact actual
mm,
presentations in court, because you're going to need a live person presenting the case to the court, presenting it.
yeah.
But other people think that there's a lot of ways in which AI can help. Now,
Mm,
streamlining, helping people formulate arguments, do legal research, and
mm,
things of that nature. Now, whether the trickier part is when, as AI and just technology gets to the point where you can um, doctor evidence without it being
mm,
obvious, where you can alter videos.
mm,
Particularly, there's so much CCTV cameras in the UK that virtually,
mm,
particularly in London, virtually every square foot is covered. Uh, but if that could be altered in some way so that it is designed to
mm,
present something that's not true, but it could be damaging to the defense or damaging to the prosecution, then
mm,
what can we believe if we can't believe our own eyes?
mm,
But there are also, very skilled people who are trying to uh, create or develop techniques of being able to tell when something has been altered, even at a
mm,
sophisticated level. How AI actually affects the legal system is still very much up in the air, just like it is how it's going to affect
mm,
society as a whole. I mean, let's face it, individual defendants, with the rare exceptions of billionaires or, very wealthy people,
mm,
can't afford the kind of expertise to testify in court, much less get
mm,
involved in altering evidence. Plus, by the time the defense is involved in the case, the evidence generally has been gathered, and if it's going to be doctored by law enforcement, and that, before the defense ever sees it. So
mm,
it would be very hard, I think, it would be very hard for, let's say, the defense to get some CCTV tape and a recording,
mm,
and then that's presented to them in discovery after law enforcement is collected, and for them to then alter it without it being obvious that it's different than what they got.
mm, mm,
So, will I mean, if people are able to discover that something has been altered, let's say that it's a
mm,
situation where
mm,
the defense has an expert who can, look at the metadata
mm,
and all the background, I can see, aha, there's evidence that this
mm,
video recording was altered, and that's presented to a court, then that may very well result in a dismissal of the case, and should, because the
mm,
evidence was altered. It's the original is destroyed. How can we believe anything anymore?
mm,
So may result in dismissals, but I think it's more likely to result in wrongful convictions, actually, because law enforcement and the prosecution just has more resources. There's been a steady erosion in the defense in the UK, for instance. Barristers make that very little money, really, what they
mm,
have to do, and there's um, a real imbalance in. I mean,
mm,
the whole idea of an adversary system, which the UK employs, as do we, is that
mm,
if you have two relatively skilled, equal parties on each side presenting their view of the evidence against the
mm,
others, that the truth will come out, or that the jury will be able to discern the truth, or close to it anyway, whatever justice might
mm,
be. But to the extent that there's this big imbalance, and the
mm,
prosecution has all the resources and the defense is unskilled or underpaid, then you tend to get lower quality or lower experience attorneys. It
mm,
and that's been going on for a long time. And then when you add something like AI to it, it's going to be even harder to
mm,
even DNA, for instance. DNA evidence has become much more sophisticated, but you
mm,
many of the public defender offices, the big ones in the United States now, have finally developed, have tried to specialize more within the office. They
mm,
have
mm,
forensic units where um, certain of the attorneys are more trained and skilled in understanding and therefore challenging, pointing out the
mm,
weaknesses in forensic evidence. But very few offices are really set up that way because it takes a lot of manpower and resources.
mm,
So, so a lot of the, DNA seems like it's so conclusive when people hear about it, but it's
mm,
actually becoming less probative with time than
mm,
it used to be, because it's become. I mean, this is the irony. It used to
mm,
take a lot of uh, of a DNA of a bodily fluid, let's say blood,
mm,
semen,
mm,
at a crime scene or on the victim's body, to be able to develop a DNA profile. And so if you found
mm,
someone's DNA on that uh, body or in that place, it was very incriminating and
mm, mm,
powerful probative evidence. But now the tests have become so sensitive that they can pick up just a few cells. They can, from a few
mm.
cells that are left, they can pick up an entire profile.
Okay.
And that's now raised these mixtures where people are, um,
Mm,
there's innocent, what they call innocent transfer or touch DNA, where your
mm,
DNA could be on let's say they're on the murder weapon or at the crime scene or on the victim's
mm,
body when you never were there, because you touched or
mm,
shook hands with somebody else who then touched somebody else, and then your um, your DNA is found. So, but it takes a lot of skill for attorneys to understand that, and
mm,
experience and training, and to be able to
mm,
present that to the jury so that they understand, hey, just because this DNA of the defendant appears in this location or on
mm,
this evidence, it does not end the inquiry. You have to look at the rest of the evidence because there's an innocent explanation that could be possible.
mm,
So yeah, I do worry that that's going to become even more of a problem,
mm,
more sophisticated, and um,
mm,
the more use of algorithms. Already, there's private
mm,
firms that won't turn over their source code because it's proprietary trade secrets, as
mm,
they call it, that they don't want released. And it's very difficult, even if you have the resources, to have
mm,
a defense expert be able to challenge it.
mm,
If it's the defense evidence, if it's my evidence that I'm trying to present, and the state argues or the government argues that that's been doctored, then they must have some reason for that, and ultimately they need to present it to a judge and
mm,
justify why they think that. And so do I. If I believe that the prosecution's evidence has been doctored, the only way I would know that is if I have some sort of expert who looked
mm,
at it,
mm,
and um, and then you get into the whole question of uh, does that mean a case must be dismissed,
Mm,
That just this evidence is excluded and the prosecution and the litigation of the case can continue without it?
mm,
Um,
mm,
does it mean that the altered evidence, which may not be conclusively altered, there may be
mm,
signs or hints that are suspicious, and will that be excluded, or will the judge say, well, I'm
mm,
going to allow that to come in, but
mm,
the jury can then hear both sides experts and make a decision, what weight to grant to that evidence. In other words, that
mm,
it's admissible, but it's left to the jury to decide what weight to give it. And that, unfortunately,
mm,
is what happens in America most of the time, um,
mm,
even with um, coerced confessions, for instance.
mm,
Judges tend to allow them and say you can challenge that, and the jury can ultimately decide. But
mm,
so really, that if that issue comes up, that's just sort of the beginning of
mm, mm,
the difficulty and the challenges that have to be handled, and ultimately
mm,
it's going to be the judge who makes those kinds of
mm.
decisions about what the consequences are.